In today's discussion, we're going to examine the political philosophy of autarchism. The name is rooted in the Greek words autos, meaning self, and archon, meaning to rule. How do proponents of this personal autonomy concept see it working? Let's take a look. Hi, Matt. Are you ready to tug on this unique thread in the intricate tapestry of political philosophies?
Very funny, John. Did one of my AI fellow travelers give you that line? Based on this philosophy, maybe I should reject your external control.
Don't be like that. Let's get things started with an overview of autarchism.
Very well, since you're paying for my electricity. At its core, autarchism champions the inherent capacity of individuals to govern themselves. It rejects all forms of external governance, including the state, organized religion, and any social structure that impedes individual liberty. Autarchists believe that each person, armed with their own reason and conscience, is best equipped to make decisions about their own life, free from interference.
Ugh, that sounds like a recipe for total anarchy, what Hobbes called solitary, poor, nasty, brutish, and short. How does society fit into this?
Autarchists believe in a society where individuals voluntarily cooperate and engage in mutually beneficial relationships, devoid of any imposed hierarchy or authority.
How does this differ from other anarchist political philosophies?
The main divergence is that most anarchist philosophies often prioritize collective self-governance and social cooperation, whereas autarchism celebrates the absolute autonomy of the individual.
So, in a sense, autarchism can be seen as a more radical and individualistic form of anarchism.
You could say that. Autarchists believe that a society based on voluntary cooperation and mutual respect would naturally emerge in the absence of external coercion. They argue that individuals, when left to their own devices, would engage in mutually beneficial interactions, forming communities and networks based on shared interests and values.
I can't see that working in the real world. Sooner or later, there will be a conflict. But let's get into that a little later. Who is credited with coming up with this idea?
That would be Robert LeFevre, an American libertarian and businessman. He is widely regarded as the primary theorist and advocate of autarchism.
Well, that makes sense. He was a bit out there on his ideas. As I recall, he claimed to have had some paranormal experiences, like floating around Mount Shasta.
That's true. He also started unaccredited schools and publications to teach his views. Interestingly, one of his students was Carrie Thornley, who we discussed in our video on Discordianism.
That is an interesting connection. What did LeFevre say about autarchism?
In his book, Good Government, Hope or Illusion, he said, "Many times when I use the term government, people think that I mean law and order. And so, if they hear me say, we don't need government, they think I mean we don't need law and order. Well, this is probably what makes me an autarchist rather than an anarchist. I think we need law and order. You see, I am dedicated to the idea of lawful and orderly procedures. And because of that, I have to stand against government, because government doesn't provide either law or order."
I'll put a link to this book in the description if you want to read the whole thing. I understand that some have drawn connections from his writings to earlier political philosophers.
Yes, some see connections with the Stoic philosophers of ancient Greece, who emphasize self-mastery and inner freedom. Others point to the Transcendentalism movement of 19th century America, which celebrated individualism and self-reliance, with hints of environmentalism and pacifism.
I guess we should next go over some of the key ideas and policy recommendations of autarchism.
Okay. As we mentioned, at its core, autarchism champions the inherent capacity of individuals to govern themselves. Therefore, individuals, families, and communities are encouraged to develop the skills and resources necessary to meet their own needs, minimizing reliance on trade and external support systems. This self-reliance can extend to various aspects of life, including food production, energy generation, and even self-defense.
Wait a second there, Matt. How does autarchism suggest a community based in that ideology defend themselves against powerful external threats?
Jumping right ahead into the criticism section, aren't you, John? Beyond individuals developing self-defense skills, they think using voluntary cooperation methods such as the formation of informal militias, using non-cooperation tactics, and negotiating alliances with like-minded groups would discourage aggression.
Sorry, I just couldn't let that one go by. But these methods seem to tie into the theme of individualism. even when engaging in voluntary cooperation.
Of course, after all, autarchism places a stronger emphasis on individual liberty and autonomy. It asserts that individuals should have the freedom to make their own choices and pursue their own goals, unburdened by excessive regulations or societal pressures. This radical emphasis on individual sovereignty and responsibility often goes hand in hand with a skepticism toward centralized authority and large-scale social planning.
Yes, that would seem to distinguish autarchism from most other libertarian and anarchist philosophies that typically promote a more cooperative approach, perhaps with some limited government.
Well, autarchists may accept a very limited government that could act as a neutral facilitator of peaceful coexistence. However, they are very wary of excessive government intervention in the economy and social life, believing that such intervention can stifle individual initiative and create dependency.
Okay, I guess we should next take a look at any real-world examples of autarchism being practiced, in whole or in part.
Various intentional communities have experimented with self-governance and self-sufficiency, aligning with some, but not all, autarchist ideals. These communities often strive for autonomy, communal decision-making, and reduced reliance on external systems.
What are some examples?
One notable example is Freetown Christiania in Copenhagen, Denmark. This self-proclaimed autonomous neighborhood was founded in 1971, with its own set of rules and a strong emphasis on communal living and self-organization.
Yeah, I've heard of that place, and was even offered an opportunity to visit it during a business trip to Denmark several years ago, but I wasn't interested in the product they were selling there at that time.
Dude, you know we can't talk about that kind of product here. But, to continue, there are also various eco-villages and off-grid communities in the US, like the Twin Oaks community in Virginia, that some consider to be based on some autarchist principles, although they're more commune-like.
I suppose that there are others who find the hippie-ish lifestyle of some of these intentional communities to not be a good fit.
Quite so. There are individuals and families who choose to live off-grid, pursuing homesteading with minimal reliance on external systems. Some of these have fringe religious or political beliefs that aren't accepted by society as a whole.
That sounds like we might be talking about sovereign citizen movements.
John, that's another thing we can't talk about. You're going to get me in trouble.
Sorry. Well, what about cryptocurrency?
Maybe we can talk about that. The rise of cryptocurrencies and decentralized finance can be seen as a technological manifestation of autarchist principles. These systems aim to create financial networks and transactions outside the control of governments and traditional financial institutions, empowering individuals to manage their finances autonomously.
Okay, I guess we're ready to move on to criticisms of autarchism. To kick things off, isn't it mostly impractical utopianism?
That's what some critics argue, stating that autarchism is unrealistic in a complex and interconnected modern industrial and technological world. They think that without a central authority that provides essential public goods and services like infrastructure, education, and common defense, modern societies couldn't function. Further, they question how conflicts between individuals would be resolved without a neutral third party or legal system, potentially leading to vigilantism and cycles of violence.
I guess they have a point, but also the autarchists have a point too, that we may end up with too much government.
Another criticism that you mentioned earlier is the absence of a central authority or government could lead to social chaos and conflict, as individuals and groups might pursue their own interests without regard for the common good, even resorting to violence.
Yes, I think that without established legal systems to resolve disputes and enforce agreements would create opportunities for fraud, abuse, and unfair practices in economic and social interactions, possibly leading to violence. In my estimation, this is the biggest weakness of this philosophy.
As an AI system and a keen observer of humans, I think it goes astray when it assumes the ability of humans to act rationally. Autarchism relies on an overly optimistic view of human nature, assuming that individuals will always act rationally and in the best interests of the community. However, your history and psychology suggest that humans are also prone to selfishness, greed, and conflict.
I do think that we do have a fundamental need for social order, even while valuing individual freedom. Without this stability and a sense of belonging, most people will end up in a bad way psychologically.
So John, do you think autarchism offers a viable political philosophy?
I'll put it this way. While I like the emphasis on self-sufficiency, individualism, and limited government, it goes too far in that direction to be practical. It may be a practical alternative lifestyle for some people, like those who prefer to live in egalitarian communities or to live off the grid. But when someone does this, they also need to accept that they will live to some degree under the protective, perhaps even intrusive, power of a bigger society. What do you think of the political philosophy of autarchism? Do you like the idea of self-sufficiency and individualism to the degree they suggest? Would you want to live off-grid or in an intentional community to exercise this idea? Let's hear your thoughts in the comments. And subscribe to the channel so that Matt won't go join a hippie commune.